Well, let's go on to the fifth instruction. Having familiarized ourselves with Gregorian notation, the potatus, the composite neumes like the torculus resupinus, and the more complex neumes like the pressus, we're going to shift our attention now to another aspect of Gregorian chant, which is rhythm. Gregorian chant is rhythmic. That is to say, it is ordered movement. There's movement in it which is ordered. Otherwise, it would not be music. There's something cyclic about the way the Gregorian chant unfolds. That's what we're focusing on. And we can measure the cycles by a regularly recurring pulsation, which doesn't fall invariably and uniformly as in metric music, but nevertheless does fall and is perceptible so that you can discern it and mark it in its flow. We're going to look at that and see exactly how that's perceived so as to see where rhythm is in Gregorian chant and what rhythm is in itself. So this first instruction on rhythm, first of four, is a general first approach to rhythm, what rhythm is. It's eventually going to focus on the notion of the ictus, which marks a key point in the rhythm. The music we're used to hearing is metric music with a regularly recurring beat. Oh, when the saints, oh, when the saints, oh, when the saints come marching in. Oh, how I pray I'll be in that number. Oh, when the saints come marching in. Oh, when the saints, oh, when the saints. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You see, that kind of music is, you can see right away, is very much adaptable to the march. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. There's a regular downbeat, and there's an alternation of a strong beat and a weak beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's take another example. Oh, where is my little dog gone? Oh, where can he be? With his tail cut short and his hair cut long. Oh, where can he be? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, where? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. You see, there, that's another kind of metric music, which is what we would call ternary. There's 3 beats. There's a downbeat, and usually in that kind of time, there's after the downbeat, there's 2 on the lift, so to speak. So, which giving it kind of an pa kind of lilt to that kind of music. Notice also too, there the downbeat is uniform, imperturbable. It comes without any variation. So there we have what we call metric music with binary, with 2 beats to the measure, when the saints come marching in, or ternary with 3 beats to the measure. Measure there meaning the beats between 2 downbeats. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, or 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3. So either 1, 2 or 1, 2, 3, making a measure. And we see then that the measure begins with the downbeat. We call that chained or fixed rhythm, metrical rhythm. That is, the downbeat occurs very regularly. In contrast to that, you have another possibility, which is unchained rhythm. That is, when there is a downbeat, but the downbeat doesn't necessarily come in a fixed, absolutely fixed regularity. So that the thing is, when you do have a fixed regularity, what happens is that downbeat seems unconsciously to be reinforced. So the downbeat becomes a strong beat. Whereas when it's unchained, the rhythm is either binary or ternary. There are binary and ternary units that succeed at the whim of the composer. So it's possible to, for example, binary, binary, ternary, ternary, or binary, ternary, binary, ternary, or whatever pleases the imagination of the composer. So when we have unchained rhythm, there's no imperturbable succession of downbeats, but they succeed at the whim of the composer. And that gives a certain spontaneity to the chant, which reflects the freedom of the soul. Gregorian chant is not measured music then. There are no measure bars in Gregorian chant. But what happens then if there is no measures? What's left of rhythm in Gregorian chant? Well, it's just the bare rhythm itself. Let's take a look at the book, which gives us a kind of an analogy with which to envisage what rhythm is in itself. Here at the bottom of page 74, we read the paragraph that continues onto the next page. The star dancer, or ballerina, unfolds her art in a harmonious succession of lifts and falls, little elementary rhythms, varied and arranged in refined hierarchical order. The movement as a whole displays a marvelous unity, although it is nonetheless the result of a multitude of little or great dance steps, which are like its singular elements. Sometimes the dancer's feet hardly seem to touch the ground. Sometimes, on the contrary, she bears down very markedly, the better to leap into the air. All the figures that result from these rhythmic touches are different and concur to nuance and enrich the movement. The contacts with the ground assure the precision and firmness of the rhythm, but neither the dancer nor the spectator is preoccupied with these rhythmic touches, which are, for the artist, a necessary but not ultimate means for expressing herself. The spectator's attention is, on the contrary, entirely attracted by the great rhythm of the dancer, which the expression of her body and the grace of her movements translate. We want to keep in mind this analogy of the dance, which gives the visual counterpart of what's happening in an oral kind of domain. So we have the ballerina, her movements then translate into a certain beauty, ordered movement, which the same kind of example could be given for example, figure skating or choreographic swimming, or simply, of course, the dance, even modern dance, that kind of thing. All of these display the same kind of movements, with the basis being that touch on the ground. The foot has to touch the ground to mark successive steps elementary steps in the progression of the movement. So in order to explain the movement, then we use these two terms taken from the ancient Greek understanding of movement, which are arsis, the leap into the air, and thesis, the touch, the alighting of the foot on the ground. Let's read something from Dom Maquereau, who is the initiator and expounder of this whole rhythmic theory. He said, consequently, in music, that is, vocal or instrumental music, and in poetry, the ancient Greeks called arsis, elevation, elan, all sounds and syllables which went with the elan of the body, and thesis, deposition, repos, rest, the sounds and syllables that were sung at the very moment when the dancers touched the earth, whether for mere support, a touch from which to spring up again, or to end their dance in a final thesis. So, all sounds which went with the elan of the body, and all sounds which go with the deposition or the touching of the earth were called arsis or thesis. It is therefore from the movements of dancers that these terms arsis and thesis have come down to us. We call the beginning of a rhythmic movement arsis, and the end of the movement we call thesis. So it's good to keep in mind that analogy, that visual analogy of the dance when we're talking about what corresponds to that in the chant. Visible and oral, two counterparts. Gregorian music unfolds with a succession of lifts and falls, elans and depositions, jumping into the air and alighting. What we call the touching onto the ground is the ictus. The ictus can be perceived in the movement of music. It can also, as we did, the ictus is basically for when the saints come marching in. It's the strong beat, but nevertheless, it's a little bit different in Gregorian chant. The downbeat does not have that character of strong beat. It's more like simply the fall of the movement as opposed to the rising or the lift. Again, that corresponds to the spiritual nature of this kind of music. So we can indicate the fall of the music by marking it with a vertical epizema or an ictus. And this is what we're going to have to do in order to see what's going on in the unfolding of the rhythm. Let's now then look at the definition of the ictus that's given in the manual. Page 75, we read in the box in blue there, the rhythmic ictus is essentially the moment in time when the movement, that is the chant, the music, when the movement, after springing up, falls back down again and reaches its lowest point. Now notice that I added an incise to what you have in the book. It's rather important in order to make that completely explicit and clear. That the ictus falls at the very lowest point of the oscillation of the cycle. So let's take a look at that on the board. So we can represent that by a sinusoidal curve, like this. You've seen that before. There. Now, obviously, it's easy to find the lowest point there. The lowest point, mark it there, there. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the ictus, or the fall of the rhythm. There's a certain oscillation, and whenever that reaches the low point, that's where the ictus is located. You can find that in all sorts of things. The ictus and or rhythm is found all through nature. You can find that in for example, the alternation of the amount of daylight within the year. It grows to a maximum and then decreases. You can find that in the pulse of the human circulatory system. You can find that in our breathing. That's basically a ternary rhythm. Inhale, 1, and then 2 for exhale. You can find that, for example, in a hammering action. Bam, bam, bam. The muscle contraction is going to be according to a certain maximum and minimum. Maximum when you hit the nail, and then minimum when you let go. So this is a very natural kind of thing, and it's not surprising that this, from nature, it's translated into art, and that art, which is music and Gregorian chant. Now this kind of thing can be applied to a binary group. So for example, you have 1 up and 1 down. There. So 1 beat here on the lift and 1 beat on the down. Or you could also make it a ternary. 1 beat on the up, and here we put 2 beats on the down. There, up beat, up pulse, down pulse, down pulse. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. We're going to go into detail on these various patterns in a subsequent chapter. You don't have to worry about that now. What we're going to do now is we're going to apply this notion of the rhythmic ictus to the chant in a kind of a practical way, so as to determine where that ictus occurs within the chant, so as to detail exactly what's going to mark the stages, the steps of the movement which is in the chant. How are we going to do that? We have to find where the ictus is, and we can do that by means of certain rules which we're going to learn in just a second. First of all, now though, we have to take that definition a little bit that we had just a few seconds ago, and go a little bit farther and see that counting, in a way, flows from that definition. Let's look at the definition on page 75 again. After the definition itself, that is the moment in time, the rhythmic ictus is the moment in time when the movement, after springing up, falls back down and reaches its lowest point. We go on. It is the junction point between an arrival and a departure, at once the end of a movement and the beginning of another measure or first pulse. Now that's what we want to show here on the first curve that I drew. Here, this ictus, take this ictus here, marked there. It's the end of what occurred before, but it continues. So it's also a beginning. You can look at it this way. Take a ball, throw it in the air. Doing, doing, doing. Each time it hits the ground, it ends a cycle, but that of itself begins another cycle because of its elasticity. It bounces up in the air and hits down again and continues. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about there. That's the kind of level at which we're thinking when we're talking about counting in Gregorian chant. Counting involves breaking up the piece or dividing into binary and ternary units. And the occurring of the down pulse is rather important that we learn to feel that. It's important especially for a choir so that everybody feels the down pulse together and there's a certain pulsation that assures a unity in the flow of the chant. You can see also that that pulsation is more characteristic of something as reflective and peaceful as the chant, rather than something like a bass drum, where each downbeat is marked with a great big bang. No, it's rather something that's more subtle, corresponding again to the spirituality of the human soul. However, we don't want to say that Gregorian chant is measured music. First of all, there are no measure bars in Gregorian chant. No measure bars, no measures. Second of all, even if you were to count the individual groups, binaries and ternaries, there are binaries and ternaries. They're different. Normal metric measured music has an invariable number of beats to the measure. So that doesn't fit in. Third consideration is that the characteristic of the downbeat is a little bit different, is a little bit more subtle, as we have been hinting at now, and which we're going to be exploring further as we go on. From here we can get a glimpse of the three levels of Gregorian chant. First of all, it begins on the very elementary level of one step at a time. That is a binary unit or a ternary unit. And those are the elements of rhythm that make up a piece. We've kind of seen that. The second level is called the composite pulse. It takes the flow of the rhythm from one ictus to the next ictus and corresponds to the measure in modern music. Here the ictus is not only a point of arrival, as it is in the elementary rhythm. It is a point of arrival and a beginning of the next cycle, if you like. Then finally, a third level is called the composite rhythm. It involves taking each ictus and seeing the shape that the melody describes and assigning to each ictus either a progressive arsic value or a diminishing thetic value. And that ends up in something like this. These are arsic curves, arsis, arsis, thesis, 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 thesis. Doesn't that make sense? And here, at each point, you have an ictus. Doesn't that describe a well-ordered movement? Something that moves toward the peak and then falls down from it to come to rest at the end. So that's the third level of the rhythmic synthesis. Those three levels will be the subject matter of the three subsequent instructions, lessons 6, 7, and 8. That is 6 elementary rhythm, 7 composite pulse, and 3 and 8 composite rhythm. For now what we have to do is to find out how we determine where the rhythmic ictus falls within a given piece. And the way we do that is by through a few very simple rules. There are 3 rules to know. And the first rule is obvious. The ictus, or the vertical epizema, falls whenever it's marked. That is, whenever it's marked, that's an ictus. So there are some ictus already marked in the piece. We'll see that when we take a look. Second rule is all long notes carry the ictus. The beginning of a long note carries the ictus. And that makes sense. A long note is a natural, it gives a natural sense of repose. Every song, every piece ends on a long note. Bum, bum. But by nature, a long note attracts a downbeat. So, where the ictus is marked, long notes. Third rule, beginning of a neume. 3 rules, simple as pie. It's just that we have to take a look at those rules a little bit more carefully to make sure we've assimilated all the implications. So let's go now to the book to look at that. So here on page 77, we have the rule of the rhythmic ictus. Well, the vertical epizema, well, that's simple as pie, the ictus occurs where the ictus is marked. It's done for you already. The second one, long notes. The ictus falls on every long note. That's simple. So what does that include, though? We detail what that specifically means. First of all, dotted note. Any dotted note is a double note. And so that's a long note. The note has to be dotted. A vertical epizema, which causes secondarily a lengthening, does not attract the ictus of itself. It has to be dotted. So dotted notes, there, falling here on the dotted note and falling here on the dotted note. 1 and 1. Second implication, a pressus. A pressus involves a fusion of 2 notes. The fusion of the 2 notes makes 1 long note. It's a long note, a double note. Therefore, at the first note of the pressus itself gets the ictus. The first note of the long note caused by the pressus. That's rather plain too. Here you have another example. You have a potatus making a pressus with a clevis. That makes a long note here. That first note gets the ictus. Third case that we have to make sure we see is the euriscus. The euriscus, remember, is an apposite note, a note tacked on to the end of a neume. When you tack on a note like that, a punctum to the end of the neume, you make a long note necessarily. So this is a long note. There's the euriscus, remember. This is a clevis with an euriscus. That makes that long note there. The first note gets the ictus. Here you have a torculus plus an euriscus, making a long note. The first note is a double note, thus it gets the ictus. Okay. First rule, where they're marked. Second rule, long note. Third rule, you got it, beginning of a neume. Beginning of a neume. So the first note of a neume. Let's see what that means, what that implies. Here are some neumes at the bottom of page 78. That's obviously already a long note here, caused by it's a pressus major, remember? The long note attracts the ictus. But here, there's no long note. That's just lengthened, but they're not long notes that qualify for the second rule. Huh? The beginning, the first note of the neum gets the ictus. So here we don't have a neum, so that doesn't fall into it. That doesn't fall under the rule. Here we have a neum, a potatus. The first note gets the neum. No, this is a clevis, sorry. First note gets the ictus. Potatus, first note gets the ictus. Climacus, first note gets the ictus, etc. So we have to look at some not too obvious cases, or cases where there's could be ambiguity. First of all, the salicus. The salicus, remember, looks like a scandicus, but it has the ictus at the base of the potatus. See, the beginning of the salicus is here, but there's already an ictus on the second note, and you can't have two successive ictus. There has to be at least one offbeat, if you like, between two successive ictus. So here the salicus is an exception to the rule. That is, the beginning of the neum does not get the ictus because the ictus is already marked. And this is an occasion to make this remark important, that the rules 1, 2, 3 are listed in order of priority. So the rule number 1 overrules rule number 2, and eventually rule 1 and 2 will overrule rule number 3. Another special case for this third rule is the quilisma. You remember, the quilisma is analyzed in such a way that what you do is you break off the neum just before the tooth note, and the quilisma itself is what begins with the tooth note. Yeah? So in this first example, you have a quilisma potatus. So that's really the quilisma there. So remember the way we'd call that neum, we'd name that neum, would be a punctum plus quilisma potatus. Now, so strictly speaking, the quilisma begins at the tooth note. No, here the ictus comes at on the note before that. That is the very first note of the group. Let's look at the second rule, second example. Again, you have a quilisma potatus. The ictus on the first note here is a double note. It falls on the beginning, 1, 2 on that note, 1 on the punctum preceding the quilisma potatus. 1, 2, 3. Here on the third example, you divide the group here, giving a torculus plus a quilisma torculus. But you count 1, 2, 1 on the note previous to the tooth note, 1, 2, 1, 2. The third rule then is called a disaggregation. A disaggregation is a special situation that you find in the notation such that you have on one syllable a lone punctum followed by a generally ascending neum. That was a shorthand way of expressing that lone punctum, by the fact that it's separated from what follows, is what commands all that follows. So in that case, that punctum takes on a special rhythmic importance, and it gets the down pulse, it gets the ictus. And let's take a look at that in the book. We have a lone punctum here, plus followed by a generally ascending neum. That lone punctum gets the ictus. We mark the ictus here. 1, 2, 1, 2. Whereas if we were to consider these, the punctum isolated completely on another syllable, for example, then that would be the end of a preceding rhythm, and you'd third rule, you'd begin the count here at the base of the torculus. Here's another example on the next page, 80. You have a lone punctum plus a generally ascending neume. There you see what we mean by generally ascending. You see that the neume itself is descending, but the whole movement is, on the whole, ascending. This is a disaggregation. The lone punctum then gets the ictus, and you count 1, 2, 1, 2. To complete our treatment of where in particular you place the ictus in the notation, when you have a notation of Gregorian chant, let's just consider a special case where you have 5 notes in a row that you have to rhythm. This often happens at the cadence of a piece, the last few notes before the end of a piece. So you have something like this: a scandicus, subipunctis, and then a long note. Okay, so the long note, second rule, attracts the ictus. Sure about that. At the beginning, there's an ictus, the beginning of the neume. Now, the thing is, we could either put the ictus here or put it here. What should we do? It's a conscience case, if you like, in Gregorian chant. Practice and reflection have given this kind of rule of thumb. It's better to put the ictus on the highest note. It avoids the kind of drawers or piston effect, and it also it corresponds more to the shape of the melody. So we put the ictus here, so the ictus goes there, and generally it will be your rule of thumb. Then with 5 notes in a row, you put the ictus on the highest note. So let's summarize what we've learned about the placing of the rhythmic ictus. First of all, where the ictus is marked, first rule. Second rule, long notes. Third rule, beginning of a neume. You're going to have to probably refer to the manual to look up the special cases as you do your exercises and homework. Now, the considerations are a little bit more involved, though, when you're dealing with a syllabic chant. A syllabic chant is a chant in which one note corresponds to one syllable. Only one note per syllable. There you can see that you have a problem because you can't apply the third rule. There's no neumes. One note per syllable. There are few long notes usually in that situation. Usually they're just simple punctums. And then not all the ictuses are marked. How do you determine where to mark the ictus? How do you determine thus the flow of the rhythm? Okay, we have to back up and do a little bit of get some terminology straight with regard to the structure of the Latin word, because we're going to have to fall back on the Latin word in order to find the rhythm in this situation. So in Latin, basically you have 3 kinds of words from a rhythmic standpoint. you have monosyllables. I bet you can guess what that is, huh? It's just one syllable. Et, tu, said. Huh? So that's the first class. Second, called spondees. Now, those are words whose accent falls on the next to last syllable. You'll see what I mean by an example. Deus. Deus. The accent is on the next to last syllable. Tuus. But also confecit. Huh? The accent is still on the next to last syllable. Or contraait. 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 The accent is there. Sorry. No, I misspelled the word. There's another A there. Contraait. He contradicts. Contraait. So the accent is there, second to last syllable. There's two syllables before, but that's a spondee. There's a third class, and these are called dactyls. And they are Latin words whose accent falls on the third to last syllable. The third to last syllable. You'll see what I mean? Dominus. Dominus. How do you remember that? A dactyl is the Greek for a finger. Dominus. Dominus. Deus, spondee, Dominus. But this can also be cantabilis. The accent is there. That's a dactyl. There are no other Latin words. They all fall into one of these categories. It has to be a monosyllable, or a spondee, or a dactyl. Now, with that under our belts, we've got a syllabic chant then. How do we find the ictus? First of all, we determine where the first certain ictus is, where there's a long note or a marked ictus. We find that. We know that there's an ictus there. We mark that, or at least we find where it is. Then we work backwards. We work backwards, keeping in mind the 4 following rules. These rules, you'll notice, have to do with the Latin word. First of all, place the ictus preferentially on the final syllable of the word. On the final syllable of the word. Second rule, place the ictus preferentially on the accent of the dactyl. Dominus. So, finals, accents of the dactyls. 2 more negative rules. Third rule, avoid placing the ictus on the second pulse of a ternary beat. Let's look at that. You have a pulse, ternary pulse. That's an upbeat, downbeat, downbeat. There, 1, 2, 3. Now, that's another 3. 1, 2, 3. You don't want to place the ictus here on this one. You can place it on here or here, but so avoid placing the ictus on the second pulse of a ternary measure. The fourth rule is avoid placing an ictus on the penult, that is, the next to last syllable of a dactyl. That's no good here either. If you place it here, that at least you want to avoid if possible. So let's review those 4 rules. 2 positive. The finals, place an ictus on the finals of words preferentially. Place an ictus on the accents of dactyls. 2 negative rules. Avoid placing an ictus on the second pulse of a ternary unit, and avoid placing an ictus on the penult, the next to last syllable of a dactyl. Okay, keeping those rules in mind, we can determine the ictus pretty well in all cases. So let's take a look at that, how that pans out. In particular, we're going to work on an example with the manual. So open your book to page 81, and we have at the top of the page 81 and the bottom the basic rules that we just went over for syllabic chants, placing the ictus for syllabic chants. So turning the page 82, we have we're taking the Victime Pascale Laudes sequence for Easter, and this is a kind of syllabic chant. 1 note per syllable, and let's try and find the ictus. So the first thing we do is we look and see actually page 81. Page 81, we'll take a look at what we're given here. We look for the first certain ictus. Now that's a certain ictus there. Why? Because it's a long note on viventis, the last note. But there's also a certain ictus here. We know that there's an ictus on the first note of this neum. Okay. So what do? We apply the first rule. Place the ictus preferably on the final syllables of words. So we'll place an ictus here and here. See? There we go. We've got it done. Christi sepulchrum. And then that leaves 2 notes before crum of sepulchrum in distress. We'll put an ictus there. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's just fine. Let's take another example. Maybe we won't get off so easily every time. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 4 rules. There's 4 rules, not just 1 rule. So, dux vitae mortuus regnat vivus. Okay. The first certain ictus is here. It's a long note. We put it there. Now, let's take the first rule. We place an ictus here. If we do that, though, what happens is there. That's 1. This one is 2. This one is 3. What happens here? On 2, we have an accent on the second pulse of a ternary unit. That's something to be avoided. So let's see if we can find a better solution. Why don't we, in that case, take the next rule, place preferentially the ictus on the accent of dactyls. That puts it here, mortuus. And then that makes an accent here. We can't, we don't want to put it here. If we put it right at the beginning, that again we have an accent on, suppose we were to put it here, we would have 1, 2, 3. We have an accent on the second beat of a ternary group. No, so we'll keep it like this. This is a pickup beat, 2, it pans out to be, it ends up to be 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 on that last long note. Now, let's look at the last part. Certain ictus there. Apply the very first rule, preferentially on the last syllable of the word, and that works out just fine. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's going to need some practice, and believe me, you'll get the practice if you persevere in this course. On the next page, you have those rules summarized for you once more. I urge you to take a good look at that and probably to review those last pages where the rules for the rhythmic ictus and the special rules for the rhythmic ictus in syllabic chants are detailed. Another little section that preparatory to our exercises in rhythm. This is the first time you'll have some exercises in rhythm. Just one more detail to get straight, and that is, what do you do at the bars? Because the bars, as we saw in a previous lesson, involve a certain pause. When do you make a rhythmic pause? When do you not? That's all detailed in the manual. Let's take a look at that. Beginning on page 84, you have detailed all the rules and the rhythmic considerations for the bars. For the quarter bar, for the half bar, for the full bar, and for the double bar. Briefly, quarter bar, no rhythmic stop, in principle, no breath, and then no slowing down. For the half bar, no rhythmic stop, breath taken from the value of the previous note, especially if it's long, and there's no slowing down. For the full bar, there's two cases that you have to consider, depending on what happens after the full bar. The question is there an ictus on the first note after the full bar, or is there not? If there is an ictus on the first note after the full bar, you have the first situation here on page 85. One here, there's an ictus at the bottom of this note. In that case, after the 1, 2, which belong to the long note at the end of the previous phrase, that full bar gets a count of 1, 2, and then you begin on the next 1. In the other case, that is, the ictus is not on the first note after the full bar. This is the case here. The ictus is here. Third rule, beginning of a new. This is a pickup note. It's a 2. In that case, after the long note that ends the previous phrase, 1, 2, you have 1 in silence. The pickup note is 2, and 1, 2, and you go on. So those rules have to be assimilated so as to know what to do when you encounter a full bar. The same case holds for a double bar in alternate chants. So for example, in the Gloria 11 that you're going to be working on for your homework. And just the double bar, though, is treated at the bottom of 85 with respect to when the double bar closes a piece. So there's no final, there's a final rhythmic stop, of course. Well, you breathe at the end of the piece, or you breathe, it's over. You're free to breathe whenever you want. And then there's a rather considerable slowing down just to mark that we're coming to the end. So let's just quickly review that. Quarter bar. Rhythmic pause, none. Breathing, none. Rallentando, none. Half bar, rhythmic pause, there's no blank. No. Breathing on value of the preceding long note. You snatch a breath from the previous note. Rallentando? No. In principle, there's none. Full bar. Two cases, A. Next note, ictic. That has the note after the full bar has an ictus. Breathing, yes. In the rhythmic pause. And here the rhythmic pause is 1, 2. 1, 2 in silence. And then you begin the next phrase on the 1, which is the next ictic note after the full bar. So there's breathing in that pause, 1, 2, and a rallentando, yes. So slowing. To mark a semi-cadence or the cadence. It could be according to the value, whether it's a real significant point in the piece or rather a secondary. And then the second case is B, next note, non-ictic. And there you have 1 in silence. The next note is 2. Breathing, yes, you breathe on that silent pause. And of course the slowing holds just as much here. Full, let's double bar now. And we're just going to, you see the double bar in alternate pieces is same as this. Just the double bar now at the end of the piece. Is there a rhythmic pause? No. I mean, the piece is ended. There's no pause. It's over. Breathing, yeah, no, yes. I mean, it's over. You can breathe all you want. But here we have to make a significant slowing for the end of the piece. A marked slowing to show that the piece is coming to an end. You don't want to end abruptly. Okay, so there we have a table that resumes or summarizes what we have to know for the full bars. And now we have completed all that we need to know, the basic theory, the rules for the ictus, the rules for ictus in syllabic chants, and then finally the rhythmic considerations at the bars. We're ready to attack our homework assignment. We're going to start with the homework assignment now, because that will help us to do our exercises. We go to page 86 in the manual, and we read what we have to do for this homework assignment. Open the gradual, or the Liber, to Gloria 11. Okay, Use the appendix if you need to. And analyze this piece in the form of a table in 4 columns. The first 3 columns you're quite familiar with: Latin syllables, the names of the notes, the names of the neumes, and now you have to count. So this example here on Sanctus 18 has done a little bit, done the work for us. Let's take a look at that. So I'm just going to assume that you know what you're doing as regards the first 3 columns. You've done that several times before. It's just for the rhythm. You have a first certain ictus here. So that's a 1 here. That means that leaves this note in distress. What do? We call that a 2. 2, 1. Because you can't have 2 1s successively. So 2, 1, 1, 2 on this long note, 1, 2, etc. So 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That clevis, 1, 2, 1, 2. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 3, 1, 2. Now here, they stopped here with the manual. You have to list that bar, And then what rhythmic value are we going to give to the pause at that full bar? The question is then, what is the next note after that full bar? Is it ictic or non-ictic? It is ictic. It's marked. So that's a 1, and therefore you have to count 1, 2 in silence. We put parentheses around it at the full bar. Okay. Now let's take a look at the first part of our assignment, number 5, Gloria 11. Here we have Gloria 11 exposed. Our job then, I'm just taking for granted that you'll have no problems with the first 3 columns. Let's just look at the rhythm for the first few lines. We have to apply the rules. First of all, these are just the general rules. So ictus here, it's the beginning of a neume. Ictus here, beginning of a neume. Ictus here, beginning of a neume. Ictus here, beginning of a neume. Next ictus is marked. So ictus here, long note. Ictus here, long note. There is, the next note is ictic, so there's 1, 2 at the double bar. It's an alternated chant. Ictus 1, 2, 3, ictus here, beginning of a neume. 1, 2, 3, ictus here, at the base of the potatus. Beginning of a neume, ictus here, clevis, ictus here, potatus, ictus here, marked ictus there, 1, 2, 3, that's fine. Long note, long note. Ictus here, so that makes 1, 2 in silence. So there we've done what we need in order to fill out our second column, our fourth column, excuse me. Let's count out. After we've marked the ictus, all we have to do is count out. Return to 1. You reset every time you encounter an ictus. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 on X, 2 on shell, 3 on cease, 1, 2 on day, 1, 2 on O, 1, 2 corresponding to your marking the double bar. Don't forget that in your, be third column or right across if you want. 1, 2, 3, 1 on et, 2 on in, 3 on ter, 1, 2 on ra, 3 on pax, 1, 2 on ho, 3 on mi, 1, 2 on ni, 1, 2 on bus, 1, 2 on bo, 1 on ne, 2 on vo, 3 on lu, 1, 2 on ta, 1, 2 on tis, 1, 2 and silence corresponding to your double bar, and then 1 beginning with the next word. There you have a good start for your assignment. You should be able to do that without any trouble now. Now, though you have not, even though in the enunciation or the description of your homework assignment, you have nothing mentioned about bars or accents or that. For example, in the bullet corresponding to the third column, you read, in the third column, write the name of the neumes of the piece, 1 neume per line. But in preceding homework assignments, you were told this at the end of that, bullet, without forgetting to mention the different signs encountered, clef, bars, custos. Don't forget your bars. If you forget your bars, then how can you indicate the rhythmic silence at the bars? So they're very important, but also the custos and the vertical epizemas. Clef is not so important. After this, we can do our exercises. Our exercises have to, again, implement what we know now about placing the ictus. And the first exercise is on Kyrie 10. Again, we have to go to the DocuCam to look at that. In the book, you're told, take Kyrie 10 and do the normal exercises on it. That is, name the notes in solfeggio, then sing the notes in solfeggio. But now, after that, you're asked to count recto tono. And I am suggesting that you do one step before that in order to facilitate that counting recto tono. You'll see that it's done very regularly in the audio sample, which you're given again this time. But in order to do that, it would be good to mark in the ictus in your book. Now, of course, I'm not asking you to mark up your book. Take a pencil and so you can erase it afterwards. But it is quite helpful, at least for the beginners. So you're asked to work on Kyrie 10. We'll first begin with Kyrie 11, up here. So you mark the ictus, beginning of a neume, long note, beginning of a neume, marked, long note. From that, it's easy to count. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. So basically, you want to make sure before you start the third step of your exercise to have marked the ictus in such a way that you've broken down the piece into 2s and 3s. So let's do the first part of the first piece that you're told to look at. Kyrie 10 now. This is Kyrie 10 down here at the bottom of the page. You mark the ictus then. Beginning of a neume, long note, beginning of a neume, marked, beginning of a neume. Now here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't work. 4 is too much. You got to break it down into 2s or 3s. Now, what can we do? We have to break up 4 into groups of 2s and 3s. 2 and 2. Huh? 1, 2, 1, 2. So it's by computation, by deduction, if you like, here. Now, having done that, it's easy to do the name or count the notes. Huh? Count them regularly. There should be no problem. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I suggest, and then after that, singing is no problem. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Don't forget the bar. Huh? The first ictus there is there, so this is non-ictic. Then, therefore, you have a 1 in silence there. So, if you do the work, you mark in the ictus. The third part of the exercise is absolutely no sweat. I recommend that you do that at least to begin. Eventually, you're going to have acquired the mental habit of doing that automatically, a bit like driving. You see the circumstances and you take them in and you react automatically, almost. There's an excursus for this lesson. If you want to take a look at it, it's rather important. It's Gregorian chant and the magisterium. And in that excursus, you'll see, along with other excursus, especially the last one, lesson 15, you'll see how much the Church has a mind to insist on the Gregorian chant as being most appropriate for the liturgy. It's a good thing to have that in your background, also for motivation to continue work with joy and zeal. So there we've given you a good packet of things, new things, to be applied right away in the homework. Perhaps it might be a good idea to do the homework first, especially if you have difficulty with the exercises. Homework, then the exercises. The whole point here is to help you to acquire a habit of counting. The ancients used to say, the zither player learned to play the zither by playing the zither. The zither player learned to play the zither by playing the zither. What do they mean? Repetition. Repetition is the mother of learning. The zither player learned to play the zither by playing the zither. Okay, well, you already know what's up for next class. Next class, we're going to look at the base level of Gregorian rhythm synthesis, which is called elementary rhythm. We're going to be separating out the basic cell, the binary and ternary cell, from which the rhythm of the Gregorian chant is built. So, see you next time.